So in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Father God, we just thank you that we've come again this Friday during Lent. We just thank you that we could just be here. It's a big topic tonight. It's a big thing that's going to maybe weigh on our hearts, and learning of the things about what happened at your crucifixion, the build up to your crucifixion. And Lent is a perfect time to learn about that. It's a perfect time to be able to be reflective and open to what you did for us. And so we just pray that we can have the strength to keep going, the strength to keep persevering, the strength and just in all of our daily tasks, the mundane things. And Lord, from what we're going to learn tonight, knowing the things that happen to you, pray that we can have that same strength. The way that you have the strength going towards the cross, knowing how much was going to happen, or what was going to happen, and how much you were going to have to endure. So we just thank you for having done that in advance, and we just pray that we can just be open to the message tonight, whatever it comes. And just let the Holy Spirit rest on our hearts and our minds and within our souls. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. So, the pain and passion of Christ. Then Jesus said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." Everyone knows what the crucifixion is about. We know this is our faith. It's what we have basically believed our entire lives. That's what we've all come to know. If not, well, here's a new catechism lesson. But just to start off, I wanted to really get into this where the crucifixion was not a pretty picture. I wanted to show the fact that a lot of people get the idea that the crucifixion looked nice and clean and it was okay, and like Jesus just kind of stepped out of the shower looking razzle-dazzle, and just kind of had a bit of blood coming out of him. It wasn't that. It was more like how Mel Gibson gave it to us. It was more bloody, it was more atrocious, it was more horrific than I think we could really imagine. And disclaimer tonight's probably going to get a bit rough because it's the crucifixion. It's not easy. So we know what it looks like, and I think also over the years we've kind of sanitized the idea. We've kind of sanitized what it looks like because it's been a long time since we've decided to crucify anyone. And so we've kind of built a different representation of what it's like, and people and artists don't really capture the true magnitude of what crucifixion really was like. And so I think that image just shows us the excruciating pain that Jesus went through to save us. And if it doesn't, well, the next bit will. But the origins of the crucifixion, it's actually developed by the Persians. Initially, they weren't actually crosses that they used, it was more of a stake that they kind of just Vlad the Impaled people with. And kind of Dracula Untold. If you've ever watched the movie, trying to bring, okay. Dracula Untold. Vlad the Impaler is what everyone knows about as the guy that was in the, I think, Turkish Empire, where he actually literally took in most of the people that he killed in other armies and put them on a stake to warn other people trying to attack. Quite hectic. And so later on they then developed the whole T structure, where they actually, I thought this was really interesting, where they called the part that runs down the vertical structure, they called that the stipes. And the reason being is that it's close to the word stripes, because when the person's on the cross and they're bleeding, it creates stripes. That blood running down is actually the stripes that is why it's called the stipes. And so in Isaiah 53 it says that by his stripes we are healed. So I think that's quite a cool way to actually look at it. It's like Isaiah actually knew what they were talking about as well. So we can kind of get a better picture into it. And then, just better idea of like the whole stipes, and then that's what they called the patibulum. We'll get into that. And then above it they had the titulus, okay, and Jesus was obviously, they had his, which is the title as Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. It's basically anyone walking past, they could see what you were convicted for. That was your plaque saying, well, this is why he's here, this is why This is why. And so the upright post, being the stipes, was permanently fixed at the ground, as we know. And then the part that was actually the cross that created the T is the patibulum. And that was actually the only piece that the person had to carry, which we don't actually really know about, I think. We always kind of see in depictions Jesus carrying an actual cross. But if you really put it into perspective, we'll get into it just now, they would not have been able to carry the entire cross because it would have been too heavy. After having gone through the beatings and the scourging and everything, the cross, just the patibulum alone was heavy enough. But to try and carry the cross, multiple guys actually need to try and carry one cross. Yeah. So they couldn't actually, so it was just that part that would kind of get strapped to them on their shoulders, and they'd go through the city walking towards their death.
So then if they only carry that part, they put it together.
Yeah.
When they were about to just nail it together, or
basically. Yeah, so what they would do is that, so you see like over there, they kind of put it with ropes and everything to hold it together. So this was already getting erected. It was at the spot to get ready to get erected and whatnot. And then eventually they would put it all together, the patibulum with the stipes. Once the executioner executed arrived, and he'd bring his cross, mostly just being the actual patibulum, and they'd attach that to it, lay them down on it, fix their bodies into the position. I'll get into that a bit later, but put their bodies into position and then get them nailed onto it and then lift it up. So it wasn't actually the entire cross that Jesus would have had to have carried, but it's the only way to really talk about it, because it was his cross. It was his cross to bear. It was the actual wood that he got nailed to. So just interesting fact that I don't think we often really depict. And so when John 19:17 says that Jesus carried his cross, it was not the entire cross, but just the patibulum. The entire cross would have generally been too heavy for one man to lift. So, and I mean, the patibulum itself was just 50 kilograms. Doesn't sound like a lot, but if you've got to carry 50 kilograms on your shoulders after having been scourged, beaten, thrown around, your body's already in a lot of pain. Your body's already at its limits. Never mind now needing to walk through the streets, being ridiculed, being spat on, with this heavy 50 kilograms on your shoulders. So, different idea that I think we've got now, actual piece of history. And there's different crucifixion methods, which kind of scares me. It was all based on what they wanted to do to you. It was all based on how long the executioners wanted you to live. Your entire crucifixion was literally at their disposal and whatever they decided. So as they wanted you to live longer, they would just kind of put you on there with rope. They'd attach you to the actual cross with rope and let you starve. You would literally sit there, bake in the sun for however long you are and starve. It's probably a really cool way to do it, but that was their crucifixion and torture methods for convicted persons. And obviously, if they wanted you to die quicker, that's when they would nail you to the cross. That's when they put your hands and they actually just nailed you to it. And I think most of us know they never actually nailed you through your hands. It was always through your wrists. Because if it was through your hands, the weight of your body would make you fall off. It would literally rip your entire hand off. So the way that they put it in your wrist, because it's between two bones, and also it goes through really painful blood arteries, which make you bleed a lot faster. But it's also not the bleeding that kills you. But obviously they put it there because it's not going to break. Nothing's going to be ripped off. So I think in that image you can see the exact parts where the nails would have been, and then your hands would have just hung there limp. You'd have had no control over it. You wouldn't have been able to do anything. And the actual thing that you'd have died from is asphyxiation, not being able to breathe. So never mind the fact that you've been scourged, never mind the fact that you've been hung on the cross. Now you can't breathe, because what's happening is when you're on the cross, your legs up like that, all your weight is shifted. And if you've ever sat like that, you can hear my voice. It's pressing on my lungs. Okay, I can breathe, but trying to breathe out is what makes it difficult. And so it gets even worse, because now, in order to breathe, They've got to shift their weight on their feet, but now their feet's only held by a nail. So now you've got to, it's really difficult. You've got to push through that pain to push yourself back up, whilst hanging like that, to exhale. And by the time you've already done that exhale, your feet are burning, your feet are in so much pain, you're shivering and shaking. You eventually slump back down, back into that position where you can do nothing except breathe in, and then it's always that to try and get that air back out. So eventually, because you'd be there for so long, you'd eventually just suffocate. You'd lose oxygen, you'd be able to get air and fresh oxygen into your brain, and everything just starts going haywire. I mean, hold your breath for 1 minute and see how long you can actually last for. And so that's that's one of the main reasons you'd have actually been killed. And eventually you would die from the asphyxiation, but they'd also speed up the process by breaking your legs. Because now if you don't have your legs, you cannot lift yourself back up to try and get that air back out and continue breathing. So if they wanted you to kind of just get on with it, they'd break your legs. Really, really sick and cruel. But now we're getting into it.
What would be the reasons for the different ones? Like severity of crime or what?
Yeah.
Severity of crime.
So mostly severity of crime, and also just to see you suffer. It was just based up to them. The actual Roman centurions and soldiers were just like, depending on how you were, depending on what penalty you may have had. Obviously, the quicker you died, they wanted that, but also the longer you were there, the more pain you had.
There was used as a source of entertainment.
There was also that, a source of entertainment.
They did it as?
Source of entertainment.
But that's not where I'm confused now, because surely if you were going to kill Jesus, you wanted, because what he did would have been to them the biggest sin, in a sense, because, you know, they said he was a fake Jew and he was disrespecting everything. So then, why use the quickest way to kill him?
Because they wanted him gone. They didn't want him to stick around and talk to more people after he was up there. They wanted
But I
him.
mean, he's dying already. So I would assume they would then rope him. According to
No, but they didn't kill Jesus on the cross.
Yeah. But also, so,
They didn't kill because he gave up his spirit.
No, but I'm just saying.
But even the method that they chose, it wasn't to speed up his death at all.
yeah, so we'll get
Only
to
after
sense of it
Jesus
later.
died, they broke the man with the next few years.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And then
So
both-
I'll get into that. It'll make a bit more sense later, I think.
No, I know he gave up his spirit, but I'm just saying.
But I'm saying
if
they
would
didn't
leave-
speed it up in any way.
Yeah.
It was when he was ready to sign, that was it.
Yeah. So I think it might make a bit more sense a bit later, if I can say that. Because there's a whole, like, I get where you're coming at, because he's
Yeah,
now,
because you, like what you just said, the quicker one of the two is to physically nail them. So
Yeah.
they're already going for the quicker one.
Okay.
Actually, more of a painful one than it is a quick one. When they
no, but
But
it's
then
just
I
saying
get
like it's
through.
more quicker to
no, but I'm
kill.
saying it's not necessarily, that's not why they would nail him onto the cross, it was to give him pain. Why they would nail him. Because
So,
the Romans were so advanced when it came to the crucifixion that they practiced it over many, many years, and they knew exactly which position to put the nail in and how to do it so it wouldn't cause a massive blood loss.
Yeah.
Right? So you wouldn't bleed to death through those specific ones because it wouldn't have been the main artery. Because remember, if they're not in the rest like Josh said, if you eat a specific vein, you eventually bleed out like suicide.
Yeah.
So they knew exactly where it was. But, yeah, Josh, sorry.
but I get where you're coming at though. Like, it's why would they, if they hated him so much, why
Well,
would
I
they let
would
him suffer
expect
for
that they would
longer?
want him to suffer for like hours. That's
So I think that's what I'm saying is because they wanted him gone much quicker. They wanted, think of the
that's why I
political.
asked, what was the rationale behind the various
So
methods?
to understand that, you've got to know the context where it's, he has this guy that's come in, he's changing the political game, he's changing the narrative. This isn't good. We need people to come back to us. We need people to believe the Jewish tradition.
No,
But
100%,
Jesus-
but then you would make him truly something to make a point out of it. Like in the
Exactly.
sense of days or something, like you said, they would rope him.
Yeah.
You wouldn't kill him as quickly as you would kill a thief. That was next to him, I'm just saying. So that's why I was asking, because you want to make a specific example out of it.
I think so, but I think-
that's why I'm asking.
I think that, I get where you're coming from. I think
Yeah.
they would, but I think because of the status he had, because of the actual sway he had in the entire society, and not just that society, the entire known world at that stage, they were like, we need to get rid of him. We cannot have him around for longer. The longer we have him, the worse it is for us.
So what was crucifixion used mainly for?
Context,
Back then?
torture, source of power,
No, for what crimes?
Murderers,
rape, thieves,
thieves. Those are instead of prison.
people against the law.
So then what would be considered, like what crimes would be considered that should be stoned to death or just simply humiliated? Whether
Based on
decapitated or something?
Based on their authority. That's why I say it was literally up to the Roman centurions that were there, what they did to you. You became their bleach.
Okay.
Yeah, you were up to their disposal.
So it's
They
just
could
like,
do.
today I feel like you're going to die by crucifixion, so
Mhm.
okay.
It depended on their emotions, depended on their actual. There's a word that I'm trying to think of, but I can't get it out of my mouth. It depended on their blood sport, really. It really was just like a game for them. It was more of a source. It's the same as the Roman Colosseum. While they just throw in gladiators and then just throw in the lions, the first
No,
time.
that's what I'm saying now. Those
Yeah.
things had like proper rules, proper contents, proper reasons.
This
proper
didn't.
actions. Okay.
So back onto Jesus and the night before he was arrested. This is obviously where so initially he'd done the Last Supper, which we would call as Passover. They celebrated what we do every Mass, where we had the bread and wine and gave it to them in offense and saying, this is my body, this is my blood. We know this. We've done this every Mass, every Sunday that we go to Mass. And he celebrated that because he needed to explain to them, and this was his last time, to explain to them what is being offered, what is actually going to be happening. And they didn't know. He said, I'm going to destroy the temple on the third day, I'm going to raise it. What temple, Jesus? What are you talking about? This is the life-giving blood that I'm going to give out and pour for you. This is the bread of life that I'm going to give out for you. He was speaking riddles, and like Simon and Peter and all of them were like, what are you talking about, bro? Like, I don't know what you're getting at. And that was the Passover. But after the Passover meal that he celebrated with them, he's trying to explain what's going to happen and saying, do this in remembrance of me. I think they didn't really know why they needed to do this in remembrance of him until it happened. But then he went out and started praying. And everyone knows that's when he started praying so hard that he started sweating blood. A lot of people kind of get the impression that when he started sweating blood, it was a just over-exaggeration that the writer tried to actually include, that Luke tried to say that he was just praying so hard that it was like he was sweating blood. No, it wasn't. There's an actual scientific medical term that it actually does happen, where you can be severely stressing so much that you actually sweat blood. You burst blood vessels in your head, in your forehead and everything, that you literally start sweating blood. And I think that's because he knew what was coming. He knew every inch of the journey that was going to come. He knew how he was going to feel. He knew how they were going to do it. And it wasn't just that. We always talk about the pain, the physical pain, but there's the spiritual pain. There's the spiritual pain that was so unseen, I don't think we realize it. There's the spiritual pain of the fact that he was not just getting beaten and scourged and getting killed for sport. He was taking on our sins. He was taking on the sins of all those who have passed, all those that were present at the time, and for us now. And I think that's an even bigger pain. I think that's an even bigger thing to take on, because above and beyond the crucifixion, what happened during those 3 days? He went down to hell and brought all of us back to heaven. He went and said, I'm going to save my people. This is the covenant. This is what I have promised. As God the Son, but as well as God and the Holy Spirit, this is the covenant that I am now fulfilling. And so the man had a lot on his mind. You know, we talk about the fact that we're stressed. This man flipping was in an element of its own. And so the physical stress, that tiny blood vessels were rupturing in his sweat glands and emitting great red drops that fell to the ground. The symptom of severe stress is what is called hematohidrosis, that word. So you can read up about this. Relates to when Jesus said, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. his soul. I mean, we, as much as we believe that he's God in the flesh, remember he came, it's the miracle, the mystery miracle of the fact that he was human. He was human in its entirety. As God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, he was human. He felt like us, he thought like us, he endured everything like us, but to another level as well spiritually, because he was more connected to the spiritual realm. So his entire spirit felt like it was dying. God felt like he was dying. I don't know if I can make that more, like if I can emphasize that more, like God, he felt like his spirit was actually dying. And to say that, it's just like, that's because of all the sin that he felt. If God's so perfect, he opened himself up to be volatile to every sin every person in the entire history of the world has done. Mind-baffling type of stuff to think about, but we're 7 billion people on this earth now. That's excluding people back then. He took every single person's sin and said, I forgive you for it. I'm going to take this. I will atone you of your sins and do this for you spiritually. That's still something that kicks me in the butt. But now moving on to the trial of Jesus. This is after they then arrest him and they get brought to the Sanhedrin and the Caiaphas, I don't know, the high priest. And this is where he gets his first physical trauma, whether he gets struck across the face for not remaining silent, and the palace guards blind him and they with cloth and then they taunt him, and also spit on him. And I don't think we really understand that spit, like we spit today. It's like, well, look, we have the whole idea that if someone spits in our face, like, dude, like you've just insulted me. But back then, spitting on someone was the lowest form of disgrace. They actually had a really big meaning, and being spat on was really like you're dirt. You're below our feet. You're not even gum under our shoes. We are spitting on you because you are crap. Furthermore, while we do not know exactly how many guards participated, we know from history that the palace guard consisted of 900 to 1,200 soldiers. So on that, obviously not all of them would have been there, but even if it was just 10% of that, that's a lot of them busy beating him up, slapping him around, spitting on him. It's a lot of ridicule in front of all the people as well. And then in the early morning, Jesus was battered and bruised, dehydrated, and exhausted from a sleepless night, and then taken to the Praetorium in Jerusalem of the fortress Antonia, where he sat in front of the government and he was handed over to Judea, the Pontius Pilate. And then obviously we know what happens there, where they're like, no, give us Barabbas. No, we're like, no, but I can't find anything wrong with this man, Jesus. I cannot fault him. No, but set Barabbas free. Jesus is, we know the story, okay? They set Barabbas free. A man that was actually convicted of proper murder, proper convict of rape. He was a proper convict. And they said, no, take the innocent one, give us the sinful one, give us the one that's actually, we know he's actually bad, but like it's okay. You know? Yeah, it's still mind-boggling to think that, imagine having been the disciples and seeing a teacher that you know is innocent, you know he's righteous, you know he's, and you'd like, and probably, I always picture the disciples going up and saying to him, Jesus, stop. Jesus, can't you stop this? Like, no, Jesus is innocent. I imagine Peter being there saying, no, he's innocent. I'm like shouting, pick me. Like, no, he's innocent. Guys, like, listen. And everyone's there like, no, he's not. Everyone's there like, no, we want Barabbas. We don't care that he's done this stuff. Like, Jesus was God. We don't care if, like you guys are saying he's innocent. He's not innocent in our eyes. And that's quite hectic if you put it in that perspective. And then now is where he's been handed over. They've released Barabbas. Jesus has been handed over to get scourged. Yeah, this was where it gets rough. This is where Jesus really starts enduring a lot of the pain, where he starts getting beaten up severely. Where he's then tied to a post above his head so that his flesh on the shoulders and his back are stretched to a limit that makes it easily to tear. It makes it a lot easier to actually break apart and get through to the tender flesh in the back and everything. And in the ancient law, they prohibited more than 40 lashes to each person, which is why Paul had received 39, if you read in Paul's. But the Romans made no attempt to follow the Jewish law when Jesus turned for it. And he probably received more than he should have deserved. So they even contravened their own laws. And so the Roman legionnaire then steps forward with the flagrum. And the flagrum is a terrifying piece of weapon. That's what it looks like, or what multiple of them look like. And basically, it was a piece of leather that was put together, a whole bunch of rods. At the end of the rods, they'd have lead, they would have glass pieces, they'd have pieces of bone, they'd have anything that can hurt. And basically, if it had glass, obviously that's going to tear into the skin, that's going to rip everything apart. And that's what they used, and that's what was whipped on Jesus' back. That's what kind of tore his back to ribbons, as they always talk about. And so that it would also have stone attached to the ends, and it was quite a heavy piece of whip. I mean, if you have a look at the picture, you can see it's quite a intricate thing, and they whip it. And we'll get into it now, where that would get into the skin and to whack onto your back and everything. And eventually with the first hit, it would start the bruising. It would start the congealing of blood, and blood clots in your back, until eventually it ruptures the first layer of skin, and eventually keeps going deeper. And then they keep whipping. I mean, 39 lashes plus with that. That's tearing your entire back till the point where you see bone. Because there's not much skin that's between your spinal cord and your ribs on your back. And eventually they're ripping through that and exposing your entire skeletal. And it gets worse. I can't, like, I know I'm sounding terrible, I'm trying to keep it light, but it gets worse. Some parts of it might not actually hit your back, it might actually wrap around the front and end up latching on with a piece of glass of a rib cage and pull as they rip it back, and end up pulling any flesh that has come on in your chest, your stomach, your legs you were even attacked, your thighs they'd attack. And so literally everywhere it could, it would. It would eventually just break down everything. And so it would cause the deep bruises and to break open the subsequent blows that were coming. And eventually the skin on the back hangs in long ribbons. The skin literally, I don't want to get detailed, but it literally just fell. It became ribbons. You know what a ribbon looks like. That's how they tried to describe his back, of how unrecognizable it was. And so the entire area is then unrecognizable of the mass of torn, bleeding tissue. So I think that's maybe even watered down from the idea that we can get. Yeah. And so the blows also, like I say, didn't just hit the back, it also just went around the front and dig into the front and sides of the body, and the flagrum is quickly pulled back, violently ripping and tearing the flesh off the body. And in the process, the victim will have several ribs broken by the lead balls that were also attached to the actual flagrum. So there's so much pain going on. There's so much that, you know. And this is if this is not done right, so this probably did not happen with Jesus, since it was prophesied that none of his bones would be broken. But also when the centurion in charge that the prisoner is near death, the beating is finally stopped. So that's when they decided, okay, quit it, guys. But even though they'd gone over the 39, that they say that's okay to do. And so I really wanted to add this picture of the Shroud of Turin. So scientists actually went and had a look at the Shroud of Turin and found blood clots, pieces of blood in different sections. So I don't know if you can actually see all the red spots going down on both of the legs. This is the back, that's the front, you can see his face up there. The crown of thorns that they would have put on his head, his entire back over here, his entire front chest. You can see all the different red marks as well, where he obviously would have been whipped as well, where the thing's just ripped open. And then the entirety of the front of his thighs, his shins and everything, and then you see by his feet, especially in the front image, where the nail obviously would have gone, his hands on the front there, and then obviously here is the congealing of the blood after he'd been crucified and his spear was put through his side. I think that's really fascinating, the fact that they can actually pick up the blood spots and actually pinpointed. And I think they said there's something of like, I don't want to give a misrepresentation, but over 300 lashes that they could, just from that alone, like pieces of skin, pieces of blood. Yeah.
So there was supposed to be at least 2,000 stitches that he would have had to get in order to cover up the scars on his body.
Exactly, it was
2,000.
2,000 stitches.
just to try and heal his body. That's crazy. Yeah, look, and so. Sorry?
How does a person even survive that and then walk up a mountain?
Exactly, and so that's, keeping that in mind, that's why they then only allow them to carry the part of venom. Because they've still got to try and carry that 50 kilograms whilst having enjoyed this. And on top of it, you've not eaten, you've not sleep. He didn't sleep the entire night whilst he was there. He never slept an hour because he was freaking out the entire time praying. So he's also really tired. And if you've been really tired, you get cranky. But now you've been cranky and you've been beaten the crap out of.
Your body is suffering from dehydration.
Exactly.
Because at such a level, when your body looks to heal itself after being beaten to such an extent, it looks for water and doesn't give a much water.
And there's no water there. And so eventually, after the beating and the scourging is done, they untied him.
One more question.
Go for it.
2,000 stitches for his whole body or just for the sections that were?
Sections of
Okay.
That's still crazy.
Yeah.
There's certain sections that they could probably try and.
Yeah, well, that they could?
salvage.
Well, you said that, how many did you say? 49 works? 39
39.
works.
But
Is
yeah,
that the
plus.
whole? Then you just said estimately probably 300.
No, so on the actual Friday to Red, they reckon that there was like 300 maybe
Because
plus.
now with every one,
300 like what's? Like slashes?
Injuries.
Work. Oh, 300.
Like different, like, so, how do I put it? Like you see each of the marks, like that's every, you know, like when you cut yourself and you put a plaster on it and the blood then congeals onto it. Okay?
Yeah.
That's, each spot there shows a different wound. So there was about over 300 different wounds that he had.
Okay. So each circle is an individual wound.
Well, not each circle, but each of those lines. Like, I don't know if you can see. So it looks a bit better if you've got like just the picture itself. But like if you look on his legs, he's got each of the different lines going across. His back was just torn, and obviously already then it was all dried up still. So it's just the parts that they can still kind of see a bit of the bleeding.
Go back to the picture with the weapons they use.
How do I go back?
like previous.
Yeah. I said previous, let's go ahead next.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
So each one of those things is a mark.
Yeah.
Not
On
necessarily.
average, most of these,
Yeah.
when reading about it, they said that each of these things should have around about 9 sort of rods hanging down from each of the bones attached to it.
each
So
one
you
is
take
different.
39, you technically saying 39 times
Oh,
1.
exactly.
I just think that's kind of awkward.
To put that other picture in perspective.
Yeah, the actual Shrouded to Red now. And so eventually when he was taken off of the shackles that he was in, the Roman soldiers, they saw an opportunity also to make a joke out of him, which is recorded, where they actually then put a robe on him and they make fun of him and say, oh, look at him, the king of the Jews. They make the whole crown of thorns, plonk that on his head, and they don't just put it on, they smash it on to make sure that those thorns get dug in, that those thorns actually pierced and draws blood. And then it kind of gets worse because then after that, after having put the robe on him, they rip it off. And I don't know if you've ever had a bandage and it's still been bleeding and you put the bandage on and then you try, it's dried up and then you try to take the bandage off, but now the bandage is dried up with the blood and now you can't rip it off because it's going to reopen the wound. They did that with his entire body, his entire back that was open. Because in the midst, like eastern desert and everything that they were in, it dried up quickly. So they put on that robe and then, not even gently, just ripping it off, all those wounds that would have dried up reopened again. So more pain, and just for their fun, for their torture, for their sadistic behaviors. So it really is. And then after the robe is torn off, they dried up, like I say. And I don't think they talk about the fact that most artists do not even come close to depicting what Jesus actually looked like after all of this torture. He was probably the most inhuman looking thing you've ever seen. And being beaten up, having been torn apart. And actually in Isaiah 52:14 it says, so his appearance was marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. So Isaiah said that he didn't look like a man. He looked like a monster. He didn't look human. He was so battered and bruised and beaten up that he wasn't Jesus anymore. So I think the depictions that we get often of him on the cross is really, really watered down. It's really not the true representation of what he would have actually had gone through. I think 2 weeks ago we had the talk and I spoke about the bloody and unbloody types of sacrifices. This is why they call this the bloodiest sacrifice. It was the last sacrifice to be done because it was just so brutal. And so then this is the journey to Golgotha. And if you've ever wondered, like I thought this was quite cool, if you've ever wondered why it's called the Mountain of the Skull, it's because the actual mountain has an imprint of the skull there. I don't know if you can see it. So that's why they call it Golgotha, the Mount of the Skull. And so obviously then that's when Jesus was forced, after the beating, after the bleeding, after being tortured, to carry the Partabellum. He had to go down what they call the road Via Dolorosa, which people often today actually still go down, and a lot of theologians and a lot of Christians go down with their own crosses. They bring their own crosses and try to walk that distance. A lot of them really struggle in a healthy condition, but they bring their own crosses to try and experience what he went through, to try and understand. And it's a long road. If you've ever had a look at it on Google Maps, it's a really long journey to have to go through. And through that, he'd also be walking through the crowds where people would jeer and mock him, spit on him, and also just push him around in that pain. And this is obviously where he falls multiple times. And obviously carrying that wood, it also was on top of all of those open wounds. That wood wasn't nicely polished. I think that wood must have been a piece of tree that they just took down and was like, here you go, chuck it at him. Even if it was, it's still a piece of wood, and I mean those splinters are still going to get in there. Those splinters. Exactly.
Your whole body's exposed. If you ever just touch a bruise, it's painful.
Exactly. Now he's actually got open wounds where part of his skeleton might have even been exposed. Now he's got to carry that 50 kilograms on his shoulders to still try and get there. And at this point he tries to rise, but human muscles had been pushed beyond their endurance, and so the centurion, anxious to get on with the crucifixion, selects another stalwart, Simon of Cyrene, as we know, to help him carry the cross. Jesus then follows behind, still bleeding and sweating, after the 650-yard journey. 650 yards. It doesn't sound that long, and doesn't sound that far, but it's far enough to have been whooped.
How long was the fall? I mean, pillow, you want to go to let's carry his cross.
I didn't get that, no. I don't know, maybe someone's got Google quick, 650 yards to kilometers.
Was it 650 yards before you fell for the first time, or 650 yards
in total?
From the bottom to the top.
Okay.
From the bottom to the top.
Yeah.
Not from where he got whipped, it's from where he started carrying his cross.
So no, I think it's from where he gets whipped, because it's where they get whipped, where they get handed the Partabellum, and then from there they keep walking.
So from there to the top of that mountain.
Yeah, so they got to, it's not just, it's not a straight line, it's actually going down and then up the mountain. So on top of that, think of the muscles, think of the burning and aching muscles now, and the pain. And let's walk up a hill, this will be fun.
He was probably barefoot.
It's basically, it's 494 meters.
Yeah.
So about 600 meters. It's not that far when you really think of it, but in that condition, it's going to feel like forever.
About 6 right before.
Yeah, 100%.
It's a decent walk,
Yeah.
especially
But
with
it's in a healthy condition.
exactly.
Up a mountain and
Exactly, up a mountain and through bushes, and it probably wasn't a nice path that they had either. And with the whole crowds obviously on both sides spitting and pushing you along, It probably wasn't easy. And with the centurions also, I mean, we've seen what centurions do. Prisoners of war, they don't treat them nicely. They keep them around, they push them around, come, get along, move it, make it quicker. In that condition. it's terrifying. And so another thing that I just want to add on to this is the fact that there's evidence to say that if you have a look at the Shroud of Turin, I don't want to go back on it now because let's actually try and do it. So if you have a look at it, so one of the articles talking about it, if you have a look at his arms, right, the right arm is a lot higher than the left arm, and that's not because of the position he was laid. If you look at the shoulder, they say that there must have been something wrong with his left shoulder, and the only thing they can say is that it must have been dislocated. And that's why it's actually slightly lower. And so that would give you more reason to the fact that why they might have asked Simon of Cyrene to help him carry it. Because if he had dislocated his shoulder, he would not have been able to pick it up.
Do you know where this shrine is?
The Shroud of
Where he
Turin.
was laid down. So I imagine it can't be far from that mountain.
I don't know
So
where
we had to carry him by taking him off.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's still the fact of when Simon of Cyrene tried to help him. It explains why he would have asked, why the centurion would have actually asked for someone to help him as well. Because of the fact
How
that
far is the Mount of Olives from this place?
I don't know.
Not far. Because that's where he was when he was praying.
Garden of Gethsemane.
But it's close to the Mount of Olives.
I think so. I'm not too sure of the geographical
Is it?
locations.
I think it is. I'm just interested.
I'm not too sure.
Because I think they said like he dies here, but when he ascended into heaven, he ascended from the Mount of Olives. Yes or no?
I don't know. Can I pick that? Yes, no, maybe.
No, the only reason I'm asking is because the Mount of Olives, only Jewish people ever get buried there. They pay like a fortune to get buried on that mountain because that's where they say he ascended, or that's where everyone says Jesus ascended from. And they don't believe him, but they believe in the point of reference. So we say, well, I could be wrong. We say that he ascended on the Mount of Olives. That's why it's significant to us. They believe that the Mount of Olives is when the actual, true Messiah will come, because they don't believe he was a true Messiah. So when he comes back for the second one, when he comes, he'll come from there, and then anyone who's buried there will be raised first. So I consider for them the most holiest place.
Yeah.
But I think for us, that's where he ascended. I just want to actually check. I could be speaking out of the correction.
I think that's where he ascended into heaven, yeah. Because
Yes.
here he wouldn't have ascended
Never,
yet.
because it's a
He'd
place.
have actually gone down to
He would have went down to
Yeah.
hell. And it's not the same place in which he ascended. That much I do know. And I think
Yeah.
it's the Mount of Olives. That's why I asked, where's that?
Probably not too far. I
Yeah,
mean, also he
because it
was in the
wouldn't be
tomb.
far.
He was in the family tomb of David, because obviously that's where he was, and that's why he was the
Yeah,
line of
it is.
David.
So key since it says so relates to the gospel, it says first in the Mount of Olives, and in the Acts of the Apostles it describes the place from which Jesus ascended to heaven. Yeah.
So it is. So just interesting fact about the whole dislocation, and it's obviously why Simon needed to have helped him. And thanks for the extra.
No, I was just wondering.
No, it's interesting. And then obviously now is where the tough part comes in. The actual crucifixion itself, getting him onto the cross and actually nailing him. So he was obviously offered the wine mixed with myrrh, and this was just a mild anesthesia back in the day that they actually tried to use to try and numb a bit of the pain that's going to come, even though you're trembling already with pain and you're tired, you're dehydrated, he's sleepless, he's had a day. He's really had a day where he's just like, I cannot take taxi drivers no more. I can't keep going. And he has some wine mixed with myrrh to try and numb the pain, but it does nothing. It's like your local anesthetic, but it does nothing. And it was intended to try and help. And the legionnaire feels for the depression at the front of the wrist, like we were saying earlier, to make sure not to actually make too much blood and not to try and burst the main arteries, so that you can put the spike in the depression quickly drives in heavy square iron nails to the wrist. So they say square because it wasn't nails we know today. It would have been really rough, hard, thick nails because it's going to hold someone up on a cross. They can't have little rusty things it's probably rusted to glory with, but it needed to be sturdy enough to hold the body. One this side, one that side, and one in the feet, you know. It's really, yeah, sorry.
I thought it was just it's ironic that they're offering him wine to numb it, and then
Use
his
such
blood
big-
is considered for us wine, not just the
It is,
ironies
yeah.
of everything.
Yeah, it's a bit of a
And
paradox.
if you're not gonna if you're gonna consider his first miracle being turning water into wine, the ironies are just
There's too
full.
much.
Yeah, there's just a
Yeah.
lot of.
And then obviously they explain how they put the arms up, but we all know right, left, and then they've got to lift the legs up to a certain angle so they get both feet on top of each other, so they drive an even bigger nail through both. And so, yeah, the left foot and that was put up against the right foot. It was remember death was a very honourable kind of thing back in the day, so they needed to have the same right processes and everything. So there was always, that's what they say, it was always the left in front of the right. And then with both feet extended, toes down, and nails driven through the arch of each, leaving the knees moderately flexed. And so now the death actually begins. As Jesus slowly sags,
Well, I actually find this very interesting. I sort of asking out the questions. Why the left? Why that particular order?
I really don't know. I think it was just because the right foot, they was right and left. I always think people with right handed was more strong and more things, so the right foot was more dominant, and so they didn't want to let you have the dominant foot being able to press up. Or
Just
something
sort of
like that.
the sense of humiliation, basically.
Maybe.
More submission.
Yeah. And so then he starts sagging down with his weight on the cross and everything, with his wrists taking everything. The excruciating fiery pain shoots along the most sensitive nerve endings in the body, called the median nerves, and it travels along the fingers and up the arms to explode in the brain. Obviously the brain is where we feel pain, the brain is where everything is connected, the spinal cord, and all of those pain signals are just screaming. They're just there and they're like, holy cow. Not if I just walked 600 meters with a 50 kilogram thing on my back. I took beating, I've been spat on, I've been ridiculed, I'm dehydrated, I have sweated everything out, I'm tired. I think Jesus here was tired. I think we talk about the fact that we're tired. I think he was sat. That's only what I can say. He was just like, I'm finished, guys. Can't do this no more. And then at this point, another phenomenon occurs where the arms fatigue and great waves of cramps sweep over the muscles. So this is happening because now if you've ever kept your arms up like this, you're not doing it, but someone else is holding it, you're going to start shaking. That shaking then develops cramps. Sorry?
You get pins and needles.
You get pins and needles, you get numb, you get those shakes, you get that pain, you get those cramps. On top of all the pain I have, and by the way, you're still nailed to this plank of wood. And so now everything's knotting inside of him and it's relentless and it's throbbing. And with these cramps come the inability to push himself upward to try and breathe. As we're talking about with asphyxiation, now he's still trying to breathe. On top of all of this pain, he's still struggling for breath. He's still struggling to try and actually, the thing we take for granted every day. His own body is killing him at this point. His own body is actually giving in, and he cannot do anything about the situation. He is left at their disposal. He is left hanging. Excuse the pun, but it's literally the only thing he can do. And so even the pectoral muscles are paralyzed because everything's stretched out. His arms are stretched out. These muscles are not meant to be stretched out the entire time. And now they're pulling. The entire rib cage is pulling, and now I've still got to try and breathe. This is no position for anyone that they want to be in. This is a complete stress position that he's in, and he cannot get out of it. He's literally nailed to that stress position. And he fights to raise himself up in order to get even one short breath, to get carbon dioxide out of him and try and just get oxygen into his bloodstream, because you know they say, not what they say, but in the medical field, if you don't have oxygen in the bloodstream, it becomes poisonous. You need the oxygen to be able to make your blood flow and healthy cells, and if it's not, and you have carbon dioxide, your blood becomes poisonous as well. And that's why his entire body was just shutting down. His entire body was just killing him. Yeah, it's heavy. To try and get into it's really, yeah. And he's having spasmodic moments where he's on the cross, where he's literally just, he's having spasms, and he can't control the spasms. He's there, just feeling it all. He's having to just bear it. He's having to go in and bear it and just put up with it. Whereas if you ever remember PE, I think PE was like a time when most people really didn't enjoy it, and the PE teacher was just like, "You can do it." You're like, "But it burns." And, you know, like, just stop the pain. He couldn't stop the pain. He couldn't stop the moment. He couldn't do anything. He had to endure the pain. He had to keep pushing forward. And so he keeps pushing himself upward, trying to place the weight of the nails on his feet just to breathe, and then slump down again so that he can get the pain off of his feet. And also, this is also the searing agony transfers from his wrist to his feet, tearing through the nerves between the metatarsal bones of the feet. And nevertheless, he gets a breath and sags back down. It is undoubtedly during these periods of breathing that he uttered his 7 short sentences, which are recorded in the Gospels. I commend him. So much pain, and he still uttered out sentences that flip and leave a mark on all of us. And I think of this now. We're going to go through these few sentences, but think of now having this picture in your head of what he's hanging on the cross. You can see it in the back. He's shivering, he's shaking, he's in pain. He's not in a cool place. He's really struggling. He is just at the most. And he decides to utter words of saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." On the cross, and you're an innocent person, I think a lot of us try to be good people, but I think if we've been put through this torture, this type of pain, when we get onto that cross, we're not going to be there like, "Father, forgive them." We're going to be swearing and cursing and calling each one their mother. You know, he didn't. He was still commendable at this point, enduring this pain, and still said, "Father, forgive them, for they know what they do." And this is after they've also then stripped him. He was really ridiculed and stripped when he was on the cross. And like they say, in this point, this is one of the most remarkable statements in all of Scripture, because if we put in consideration actual context, what he's saying is really powerful. And then the second statement is, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Truly, I promise you will be in paradise. When he looked at the thief that said to him, "Jesus, remember me when you enter into your kingdom." And he's like, "Okay, I will." He used his dying breath in each time to do the whole, "Okay, I will," you know. I'm trying to elaborate here. The third, looking down at the terrified, grief-stricken John, he says, "Behold your mother," and looking at Mary, "Woman, behold your son." And then the fourth is from the beginning of Psalms 22. It shows that not only was Jesus experiencing great physical torment, but was also undergoing intense spiritual pain. Remember what we were talking about? He was now also taking on the sins of each person. Where he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And I think this is the part where we also all recall, where it's like, you know, Jesus even got frightened. I think this is the part where Jesus, in his human form, because we've got to remember, he was human. As much as he's divine God, he's human. He's Son of God. He's there freaking out. He's like, "God, I am here now, but why do I not feel like I'm in your presence?" And as much as he's God, he's still human. He decided to come down as human, and now he's experiencing it. He's experiencing those same emotions, which I think we've all been there. We've been there where we said, "God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you not allowed? Why have you let this happen?" And Jesus was there. And I think this is probably him taking out his frustration, where he's like, what I was talking about was like, "Your mother," type of
Well,
thing.
that's what just shows you that he was human.
Exactly.
Because in that moment, he himself was in a year and questioned, "Why are you doing this to me?" And that's exactly that for me, that line, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It always used to show me two things. It used to show me that that's how you truly knew he was human. Because even he, being the closest anyone could possibly be to God, was ever like, "Why?"
Exactly.
So that for me showed his humanity more than anything that anyone ever written about him. And secondly, like, just the sheer resilience of the
Just the
human
people,
soul.
yeah.
No, just of the human soul, because this was pure will. That's like, for me, like, I know you say that, like, no, Father, forgive them, they're not, but for me, that, my God was always like, because that's when you really, like, looked at him and was like, he really was. That was the purest form of his humanity, because we do it every day. Maybe not that, but we question God all the time. Like, why are you doing this to me? Why has this happened to me? Why can't it just work out for me?
And this is
And
like
you
the
never
only
need it.
record.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's and I mean as well to be saying these really big sentences at his
In
dying.
that much pain, and that's why I said, like, it's terrible. The fact that he died and the way he died and stuff, it was really gruesome, the way you like explaining it. But when you really look at that line,
Mhm.
there's like only one way to describe what's in that line, which is
Yeah.
like the pure beauty of humanity and the resilience of the human soul. And that's like crazy when you actually think of it.
It
When
really
you
is.
think of what he went through.
Yeah, and then still decided when he gets into the next one where he says, still going through all the pains and the actual things that, like, I don't want to get into it, but this is what they surmised was the pains that come through. But with the asphyxiation eventually leading to another type of pain, he begins to experience a deep crushing pain in the chest as the pericardium slowly fills with serum and begins to compress the heart. So basically what's happening now is all of that pain is now just put adding pressure on the heart. And I don't know if you've ever felt heart pressure pains, that's not fun. On top of all this pain, like I've said, his entire body is now just turning in on itself. It's now compressing everywhere, every internal organ he's feeding. This is the scientific part of it being explained. And it was, but this did not happen to all victims of crucifixion, but was known to occur. But in the case of Jesus, it sped up his death. The loss of the tissue fluids has reached a critical level. The compressed heart is struggling to pump thick, heavy blood into the tissues. And I mean, we know what happens if there's not enough blood going through the body. Something's really wrong.
So did he die from cardiac arrest or from
So-
asphyxiation?
I think he died from the pain. I think he just died. It was an overwhelming sense, like it was an overwhelming experience of so much pain that he went through, physically and spiritually, that he just died so much quicker. Because even the centurions will get into it, where he died a lot quicker than the rest, and that's why no bone was broken in his body, which fulfills the prophecy, is what we're talking about, which is a prophecy there's no way he could have controlled, which is actually a prophecy that they predicted in the Old Testament, and that's why they say he was the fulfillment of the Old Testament, because he fulfilled prophecies he could never control, and that's why he would have been the chosen one. No one said like that, but like God, the incarnate Son of Man. And so onto that, then his fifth cry, I thirst, and then that's where they give him the vinegar mixed with this cheap wine and everything, with the soak sponge, which is the Posco, what they call the cheap wine, which is a staple drink in the Roman legionaries, and they gave it to him. It was also a different type of drugged wine to kind of try and give him a bit of numbed experience, but I think at this point there's nothing to really try and numb the pain that he's feeling. And then he did drink some of this, and then his sixth saying, possibly as a little more than a tortured whisper, he says, "It is finished." This is obviously where he's now, I've done it. There's the word that he actually would have said in the, I think, Aramaic, to telestay. A lot of people like getting languages that means it is finished.
What was it, sorry?
To telestay. And that's what he actually would have, the part where he was, okay, God, I'm ready. And then his last one where he actually says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And exactly what you're talking about with the will that he kept going. He still said, okay, Father, I feel like you've forsaken me, but into your hands I commit my spirit. And with that, he passed away, and he died on the cross. And then this is where it gets interesting, like we're saying, where generally it took about 2 or 3 days for a crucified victim to die on the cross due to the blood loss and the actual compression upon the heart and the lungs filling up with fluid, but Jesus died in 6 hours. I think that's just how tortured he was. I think that's just how battered and bruised he was. And I think that's just how much torment his spirit was going through. That within 6 hours, whereas opposed to 2 or 3 days, it would normally take him for someone to die on the cross, he died in 6. So that's why, going back to what you're talking about with what the centurions did, if they wanted him to last longer and whatnot, this still would only last 3 days, 2 or 3 days.
The way he was killed,
The
even
way he
being
was
nailed,
killed, even being nailed,
2 to 3 days to die. They'd leave you like that for 2 or 3 days.
they'd leave you like that for 2 or 3
Being
days.
nailed like that,
Yep,
and you would survive for 2 or 3 days.
and you'd also still be starving from hunger. That's until like you've suffered and you've died from
And it's not bad
asphyxiation.
enough for you to break your legs. So good luck. And then the way that they would check the food is if they stabbed you. These are the stab, or I suppose I should have get to them. They stabbed you into the person was to eat a direct part of the drugs to the
Yeah.
arm. But to make sure that the person was
Crazy.
dead.
But you can go for 2 or 3 days, even with that whole thing that he said you can't breathe. So you can survive like that for 2 to 3 days,
Yep.
lifting yourself
Keep
up
lifting,
and
dropping, lifting. Eventually you're so tired you give up, and then that's eventually when they just suffer from not being able to breathe and they die. So that's why I'd say like 1, 2 days, third like max.
Stubborn people, 3
Yeah.
days.
The really strong-willed type of
Stay
people.
stubborn.
so if they roped you, then it's also 2 or 3 days or
A
longer.
lot longer. But then you'd be exposed to the elements, you'd be exposed to the animals, you'd be exposed to the vultures, you'd be starving a lot longer, feeling those cramps inside your body. And then still also, I think your feet were nailed, but your hands were held up. So you were still there, but you had to actually lift it.
So that's what you
Yeah.
say.
So
The only way to, yeah, okay, to kill you quickly is to break your legs.
yeah. So if you were taking too long for them, and they were just like, okay, let's just get this over with, break his legs.
Your diaphragm drops when you bend over like that, or from the actual.
No, from
That's
when you've been
asphyxiation.
away from also from being in the position of diaphragm drops.
Because
Then
now,
how do you breathe? Period.
That's what's so difficult for you to breathe in that position.
and that's why breaking your legs would kill you
Kill you
quicker,
the
because you
diaphragm
can't
drops, so
eventually.
you can't lift your body up from there. So it's one of the main reasons people die on or would die from crucifixion because your diaphragm drops.
It's a very gruesome way to kill somebody. Okay, carry on.
This is why I think this is a really difficult topic to talk about, because I don't think we really know.
No, people don't appreciate how terrible this actually is.
We don't talk about it. We always talk about the fact that he's not on the
Yeah,
cross.
like it's lovely and body down.
That's why I say we've really sanitized what crucifixion was really like and what actually happened. So yeah, and so then Jesus died within 6 hours, and since the crucifixion took place on the eve of the Sabbath, probably not on a Sunday Sabbath but a Passover holiday Sabbath, and because it was against Jewish law for a crucified person to hang on the cross during the Sabbath, the Roman soldiers then came around to break the legs of those being crucified. That's why the guys next to him also died a lot quicker too. Because it's like, well, we can't let people die on the Sabbath, we're still going to obey God. But we just crucified him.
Also, it's like, okay, it's convenient for you to die quick and else it's
Yeah.
not.
We don't want to go against God's teaching, so we don't want to kill you on a Sunday. But yeah, so then the legs of the two thieves were broken, but then when they came to Jesus, he was already dead. And so then that's when they drove him with a spear to actually hit his heart, like Nicole was saying, to see if he was actually dead. And then that's where we then get the divine mercy, when the actual living water and actual blood came out from him. Obviously the different representations, the purity from his side.
From his side. So they came in the side up and obviously blessed to go towards God. They knew exactly which section to do was to be practicing. These people that used to crucify them are Romans have continuously practiced doing this, the professional stuff. They knew exactly which part to when and how.
So to pierce your heart or to pierce
Trying to
your...
pierce the heart to make sure that if you want to get the king anywhere.
Yeah.
So divine mercy, you said, does it come out of his side? Or his
Yeah.
heart? The rays?
So, well, in the divine mercy comes from his
So
heart.
they come from the heart and the
Yeah.
blood and water. But that is with the blood and water must from his side which goes from the heart.
Yeah.
The piercing either side and from God.
Okay, so they took like okay.
But that's also because of Saint Faustina, the vision that Jesus gave her.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then Jesus taken down from the cross, wrapped in burial clothes and laid in the stone tomb. spoiler alert, he rises again.
Because
He comes back, and then just thought this was a nice image to put to where they wrap him up and put him back in there. And so I really want to just end this off, like I know it was really tough with having the whole talk on the whole crucifixion and how heavy it actually really was. But this is God's love for His creation. And I want to just leave that idea, the fact that He did this out of love. He did this out of the meaning that He wanted us to atone for our sins. He wanted to do this. If you'd have told Him no, He'd be like, get on my way, I'm going to do it. There was no stopping Him from doing it. So there's no need for us to feel guilty. There's no need for us to feel like, oh my gosh, like, you know what, Jesus, I need to purge myself now and actually get on the same level because you did this for me. No, He did this out of love. So we don't need to feel guilty about the situation. If anyone's hearts are feeling down. And then a really nice Anglican cleric from the Church of England, Frederick Farrer, actually explained it really nice. For indeed a death by crucifixion seems to include all that pain and death can have of horrible and ghastly dizziness, cramp, thirst, starvation, sleeplessness, traumatic fever, tetanus, shame, public of shame, long continuance of torment, horror of anticipation, mortification of untended wounds, all intensified just up to the point at which they can be endured at all, but all stopping just short of the point which will give to the sufferer the relief of unconsciousness. So, also, I think that's really summed up nicely, where there's just so much happening at once. Everything just overwhelming Jesus. And so why do we need to know this? Like I say, for Jesus' love for us, so we don't need to feel guilty. And Pope John Paul II said, with the perfect homage of His obedience, Jesus Christ obtained a complete victory over the disobedience of Adam and over all the rebellions which can arise in human hearts. I really like that. It's the whole new covenant that He's created. It's taking away the sins that was brought into the world and bringing the fact that we can find atonement for that sin. We can get forgiveness because of the blood of Jesus. And I think this is why we can get a better understanding in Mass, why we talk so much of the blood of Jesus, just to cover us, because there was so much blood involved. There was so much that happened. It was also the price of our salvation. And we need to be in perfect conformity to the will of the Father, just as Jesus said, Father, into your will I commit my spirit. And Mark says, 14:36, not that I will, but what you will. And then Mark 14:36 continues saying, Father, all things are possible to you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. That's always what Jesus said. I'm doing the will of the Father. I'm doing what He's sent me out to do. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Jesus demonstrated the truth of the prophetic words. Greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. And Jesus did that for all of humanity. It wasn't just a once-off, quick job. It was an entire human race. All of us that He thought of. And unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit, which is exactly what Jesus did. He bore so much fruit from His death for us that we have the gift of heaven. We can go and join Him, ask for forgiveness with a true heart, not just on the ask for forgiveness and then go and do it again. Like Jesus, ask for forgiveness for my sins. And I'll try not to do this again, what we always say in confession. And then Pope John Paul really wrote this nice part of saying love is the only key to the deciphering the enigma. Everyone know what an enigma means? Like it's a mystery that can't be solved. The enigma of pain and suffering, love that can transform nothingness into full reality. The lack of meaning, the lack of direction, the radical anti-culture, contradiction, death. In a fullness of meaning, of orientation, in an ascendant culture, in joyous affirmation, in life, folly and stupidity, in what is wisest and most sensible, it is the intimate solidarity of love, triumphant, that raises, in loving solidarity with the most atrocious suffering that kills, it is the victory over death, the crucifixion. I think those are such beautiful words that He uses to actually describe it, the actual triumphant love that raises us in salvation. And Saint Catherine of Siena, if we've ever talked about the bridge, But Jesus created the gap. She actually devised that whole idea. She came up with the whole Jesus being the bridge for the world, which I really like. I just thought I'd add that in, where he came with his crucifixion, the pathway, the actual means for every human being, the narrow gate, to be able to get to heaven. So yeah, and then
Need to split the video.
So,